Hello and welcome to the Doctor Who show's Alternate Galaxies episode on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I'm Dave.
And I'm Rob.
And we're going to talk about some Star Trek.
Dave, you've wanted to do this for such a long time.
I have been itching to talk about Star Trek for a while, and given that we have done a triptych of episodes on the Star Wars prequels, we did a triptych of episodes on The Lord of the Rings, I thought, now's the time. Let's do a triptych of episodes on the Star Trek movies.
It's the logical thing to do, and I think there's good crossover with many Doctor Who fans.
No, I think there absolutely is as well. Now, I mean, we could do an Alternate Galaxies every month for the rest of this year and do all the Star Trek movies if you include Classic, Next Gen, the Kelvin universe. You know, we could fill that up. But look, we're not a Star Trek podcast, so we're not going to do that. But what we are going to do is 3 Star Trek movies. Today we'll be doing Star Trek 2, and I'll talk about the other ones at the end of the podcast. But why did I pick... it was Rob. You were good enough to roll with my picks. So let's be honest here.
Why did you pick it, Dave?
Yeah, look, I was looking at what would make for a good conversation, and although I know there's been a lot of chat about the Star Trek, the motion picture, over the last few years, and people starting to see the good in it, and it's perhaps not as disliked as it perhaps used to be when I was growing up, that is a very unique thing that sort of feels like its own special thing. Whereas I think Star Trek 2 is really the start of the Star Trek movie franchise as we know it. Mm-hmm. So I thought this was a good place to start.
Sure, sounds good.
So this was first released on the 4th of June 1982, directed by the great and wonderful Nicholas Meyer, story by Harve Bennett and Jack Solwoods. Gene Roddenberry was offered the chance to be a co-producer on this and said, no, I want to be in charge. They said, good, you can have nothing then. And was basically just sort of, you know, at the sidelines, sort of almost in an Ian Levine type role, just giving a bit of advice now and then, like, oh, you should probably take down that no smoking sign. No one would smoke in the Star Trek universe. That's sort of what he was limited to. So, for better or worse, Gene Roddenberry free. Couple of quick stats before we go on.
Sure.
This was made for $12 million.
Wow.
Now, Star Trek the Motion Picture was made for $44 million, so less than a third of the budget of the first movie. It made $97 million. To put that in today's terms, that would be a movie budget of $40 million, making $323 million.
Yeah, nice. Very good.
So it did make slightly less than the first movie, but returned a much bigger profit because they did it on just a insanely small budget. Final introductory thing I'll do, Rob, is just say the spoiler curtain is down from now, because I don't think you can even talk in general terms about this movie without having to mention some pretty key spoiler things. So if you don't want to be spoiled on this movie, pause now.
And go watch it.
And then come back. But now we're into this. Rob, let's start where we usually start with these things. What are your memories? Where did you first encounter this? Did you watch Star Trek growing up?
Yes. To answer that question, I would have seen this, though, sometime in the early 80s on VHS. Because casting my mind back for this podcast, I actually realised I might not have seen a Star Trek film at the cinema ever, which may put into sharp relief how much of a Star Trek fan I am. The jury is out, though, Dave, on Generations. I may have seen that at the cinema with my uni mates. I was at uni at the time. It feels like something we did, but I have no solid memory of it. So I don't know whether we went to the bar afterwards and I obliterated my brain cells or something. I may have seen Generations, but I have this sense that I've never seen Star Trek at the cinema, which is weird because, to go back to your original question, we were a Star Trek household, and I remember watching many episodes of the original series on television on weekends in the 80s. We always seemed to be eating Frankfurts on toast when it was on, so it must have been lunchtime on Saturday or lunchtime on Sunday. But I digress. I didn't see this at the cinema, but I did see it on VHS very early on.
That's interesting. Okay. I didn't see it at the cinema either, because I was
small.
I was 2 years and 2 days old when this came out in the US.
Yeah, wow.
Probably a little bit older when it came out here, but not enough to have been taken to see a Star Trek movie. I can remember seeing Star Trek for the first time aged 11, when we were on our big trip to the UK as a family, and my parents were making dinner, and I was put in front of the TV while they did, and Star Trek was on the BBC. Star Trek The Next Generation, I should say, was on the BBC, and I was sort of asking Dad, like, what is this show? I think I've heard of Star Trek. What's it actually about? And is Spock the captain? No, Captain Kirk's the captain. It was like, 'cause the only one I knew was Spock.
Right.
And sort of when we got back to Australia later that year, The Next Generation did start airing in Australia a little bit later that year, and I did start watching that. It was briefly on in prime time before the networks realised that you could show Star Trek in prime time or at 11 p.m. at night, and the audience was exactly the same. So they did put it on at 11 o'clock at night, and then Australian listeners will know they ran through all of Next Gen, all of Deep Space Nine eventually, at the late night slot. Then one of the rival networks started putting on the classic episodes in the late 90s in a late slot on a different night. So I sort of saw all that, but at the same time I was going to the video shop, remember them? And just working through the Star Trek shelf, which included half a dozen episodes of classic Trek. Then a few were released for $7 an episode in Maya, and I started buying them, just working my way through, some of the Next Gen episodes that I missed. I started getting really into it a couple of years later. When I was reading the New Adventures, I started buying or borrowing from the library the Star Trek pocket books, which was sort of their version of the New Adventures. But in amongst all of this, I did start seeing the movies. Now, I didn't see any of classic Trek movies in the cinema. The first one I saw in the cinema was Generations, and I've since seen them all in the cinema from there. But I did see the motion picture as a Saturday afternoon movie on some network at some point. I remember seeing Star Trek V as a late night movie one night, and then I think the next one I probably did see was Star Trek II on VHS like you. So I remember it being a very exciting movie. I remember enjoying it as a kid and going, this is pretty good. Some of it didn't have quite the impact on me that it should, because I was still a bit young, but also the big denouement, the death of Spock at the end, was kind of, ruined by the fact that I'd already seen Star Trek V, and I knew from looking at the videos on the shelf that there was a movie called Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. So I sort of joined some dots together there.
Yeah.
So it didn't quite have the impact, but I just remember as a kid thinking this was just a fun, action-packed Star Trek movie.
I don't remember being that blown away by it, or at least wanting to go to school and play Star Trek with the other kids. Even though I would go to school and play Star Wars, I would absolutely play Star Wars. I would even play Battlestar Galactica, which is even more niche than Star Trek when you think about it, and far less episodes and things. I have absolutely vivid memories of myself and a guy called Adam. I'd be Starbuck, and he'd be... I'll always remember this, Dave. He would be Apollio because he couldn't say Apollo. So, yeah, I used to play geeky shit in the playground all the time, but Star Trek wasn't one of them, even after seeing films like this.
I don't think Star Trek was all that big out in Australia at all. I reckon there were less people in my class watching Star Trek than there were watching the McCoy era of Doctor Who, and that's not many.
Yeah, that's not many at all. But as a younger person, one thing I do remember vividly is the creatures in the jar that Khan harvests and puts in the guy's ears. I found that very unsettling. And of course, the death of Spock at the end. That lingered with me as a kid as well. They were the two big things, I think, when I think of it back then. No,
absolutely. Look, as I said, I definitely remember this fondly. It wasn't as big a deal as when I saw Star Trek 4, which was the one where I did sort of say to my mates, when they came over, hey, you've got to watch this one, you'll like this one. And that was when you could sort of share with other people, because it is very, very accessible. Now that you've looked back at this, Rob, for the podcast, what's your initial takeaway?
I think it's quite decent. It's certainly more watchable than the first film, which... maybe you've seen it more recently than me, but I remember as being very slow and plodding and very serious.
Yes.
But I don't think it's absolute top-tier stuff. I think the plot is reasonably thin. I think it does a lot of unearned stuff, like the writers decided, this is the one where Kirk gets his mojo back, so I guess to get it back, he must have lost it, so let's start with him being a grouchy, morose Kirk who's grounded and he's lost all interest in stuff. But why? How? At the end of the last film, just a few years ago, Kirk was rocketing off to new adventures. Doesn't matter. He's just like that now. I don't particularly like that sort of thing. Your thoughts on that?
So, I'll start by saying I really enjoyed watching this again. I haven't seen it for quite a few years. I think it is one of those movies where you sort of know it's good, so you don't need to watch it again, as opposed to others where you go, I might just give it another chance to reevaluate it and go back to it, which I have done with some of the other Star Treks in the last few years, particularly when I went and visited some of the locations for our Star Trek 4 and 5 in America a few years ago. Anyway,
Nice.
Look, I do think it is a very, very good movie. I can understand why, for a number of Star Trek fans, they do rate this as their favourite movie. I totally understand that. It's not my favourite Star Trek movie, but it is up in sort of the top bracket. It's up in the top 3 or 4 for me. I do agree with you, though, about the star, and that's exactly the note that I had to go off on next. So that
Really?
I think that there is a lot of good stuff in that opening sort of a few scenes. I think there's stuff we can talk about there, but I agree, it does really feel like, and this was something I found when I watched it as a kid, and again when I watched it this time consistent, is that there is this sense of we've sort of walked in the middle of a story and we sort of have to piece together what's going on. So it's like, well, why have these characters all matured? It feels like sort of 10 years since the last movie. Are they all now on a training course sort of thing now? Okay. So, look, I agree. There was a fairly universal consensus, certainly amongst the production team and the studio, that Star Trek 1 was a failure. As I say, people are reevaluating it these days. There is some very worthy stuff in there, but it is a 50-minute episode of Star Trek stretched over about 2.5 hours. That is its biggest problem. Plus Gene Roddenberry just sort of interfering all the way through it. So there was this desire, I think, to do a really clear reset of the franchise. So lower budget, different costumes, different sets, a whole different feel, and bring some people from outside the Star Trek family into it to really sort of bring it all to life. And Nicholas Meyer, I think, does that, and I think Nicholas Meyer is very well respected among Star Trek fans for doing that.
And look, before we get into the main discussion, I'll also say, in terms of what I think of it now, it does a lot of pop psychology stuff, like showing us a copy of Moby Dick because Khan is chasing Kirk like Moby Dick. Oh, wow, that's deep, And it follows it up with some Paradise Lost, and Khan is quoting, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Spock ends up quoting A Tale of Two Cities later on, and I think, Christ, some people may be like, oh, wow, literature references, this is some highbrow, high-quality shit, man, but for me, when movies just flat out wave books at you like that instead of just trusting subtext, I always get a bit itchy and agitated. And to go back to The West Wing, which is something I watched reasonably recently, listeners may remember, The West Wing would do that too. You'd have a pretty cool scene, but then someone would be like, wasn't it so-and-so who once said, and then reel off a massively long and obscure quote, word perfect, and you're like, oh, off. No one does that in real life. Again, people's experiences may vary. Some people might like it. I just don't gel with that sort of thing. To me, it's the kind of thing a 15-year-old would do to sound deep, like, quote, Jim Morrison poetry to appear soulful to girls. And I may or may not resemble that remark, Dave. Anyway.
I don't dislike it as much as you did, but I did absolutely note that those references were very, very in your face. And I did wonder whether that's a reflection of very early 80s cinema making. There just wasn't quite the trust of the audience to get those sort of references. So, yes, there is you do see the bookshelf that Khan has, and obviously there are references there. The book that Kirk is given for his birthday is The Tale of Two Cities, and so that is a nice reference back. I think that one actually does work, because it is this sort of like, hey, I gave you this to you as a birthday present, and now I'm going to quote it back to you to sort of link it back. I think that one does work. I wrote down here a couple of Khan comments, which I was going to talk about later, but we're doing it now, so let's do it now. The one that I think does kind of work is the whole, to the last I will grapple with thee. From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. It's a great line, and it's just the character quoting a book. So I'm like, okay, that sort of works as a dramatic moment. Then you have the one that on this watch I did sort of pull out and go, really? And that's the he tasks me He tasks me and I shall have him. I'll chase him round the moons of Nibia and round the Antares maelstrom and round perdition's flames before I give him up. Yeah. Which, for those who aren't familiar, I'll read you a line from Moby Dick. I'll chase him round Good Hope and round the Horn and round the Norway maelstrom and round perdition's flames before I give him up. And there's just something about doing the line, but sort of, oh, well, hang on. We've already done a couple of Moby Dick lines, so let's give them all space names. Yeah. And, and I think that's just the wrong thing to do. So look, I don't dislike it as much as you did. I like the fact that they had using the time that a movie has to go a bit deeper into these characters and to sort of look at them more than just, action heroes in a 40-minute or 50-minute episode of Trek. I like that they've done it. I do agree, though, that occasionally it's just a little too in your face.
That's the thing. I mean, have a theme of obsession and have someone chasing after someone so that people sit back and say, oh, gosh, that was a bit like Moby Dick, wasn't it? Wow. But don't wave the book around, literally.
Yeah.
Like, Moby Dick! This is like Moby Dick! No.
Yeah, look, I get that. And I will say, although we've both said that there are some flaws with the opening few scenes that set up the movie, and it does feel a bit like, hang on, when did this all happen? Okay, right, well, this is where we're going. Okay, that's fine. I do think those opening scenes do very neatly set up the themes of the movie. I think that the Kobayashi Maru scenario, setting up the idea of the no-win scenario and how you face death, is really good. I think that the scene where Kirk is very reluctantly celebrating his birthday with old friends, and there is that feeling that as I move further into my 40s, I can start to relate to of a bunch of mates who've known each other for 20 years going, you know what, we are just a little bit slower, and I'll tell you about my checkup I had recently, and hang on, I can't read that without my glasses now. Like that actually feels very real, and I do actually quite like that Kirk is growing as a character in the way that he really didn't in the first movie. I mean, okay, he was an admiral, but really he was just the same old Captain Kirk, whereas this one does feel like, well, what happens when your swashbuckling space captain does, start to lose his sight a bit and he's put on a couple of kilos and his mates are a little bit slower than they used to be. I like setting up that theme, and I think that is something this movie does really well, is there are themes that are very well woven into the movie. Sometimes not very subtle, I agree, but it is actually a movie about something more than just space adventure.
Yeah, well, I'll take those two briefly. It's certainly a nice rug pull at the start. You think what's happening is actually real, and especially when shit starts blowing up and people are leaping about and keeling over, and you think, oh, they're actually hurt, holy shit. Either this is real or it must be a dream, and it's actually neither. And putting aside that it leads into the Kirk wandering around the halls of the Academy being a grouch, I think it otherwise introduces where things are at, personnel-wise, pretty well. I actually think it's a really great start to the film.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting start to the film. It's interesting, the reason why some of it was done is because the production team heard that the plan to kill Spock had leaked out. Now, urban legends unconfirmed are that Gene Roddenberry went along to some Star Trek fans and said, guys, they've kicked me off the movie and you wouldn't believe what they're doing. They're going to kill Spock. How dare they? And
wow.
And let that go. And so when they heard that this was out in the zeitgeist, they said, well, you know what? We'll do a fake death of Spock in the first act. And everyone's going to go, they're not really killing Spock. It was just, they just filmed this scene to make us think that's what it all is. So that people wouldn't be waiting for Spock to be killed later on in the movie.
That's actually clever. And the second thing I was going to mention is Kirk's birthday. We take that step beyond him being a grouch. We go to his home. That's quite interesting. But gosh, Dave, for being a doctor, McCoy sure isn't much with his advice. I mean, Kirk's having this midlife crisis, and it's handled with the emotional depth of, oh, well, maybe you should just get back in the captain's chair. You'll feel better. That's the extent of the advice. Like, oh, sure, why didn't I think of that? For me, it just raised more questions than anything else. Again, why is Kirk in this position at all? He always loved being out there. How would he have allowed this to happen? Again, at the end of the last film, he was out there having great adventures. What has happened? So I return to that.
Yeah, I don't mind that so much, because I did understand this idea that Kirk was very ambitious, and so he went for the promotion. Like, I've been a captain, now I'm going to be an admiral. I'm going to be head of Starfleet, and then suddenly realizes that he doesn't want to be the head of Starfleet. He doesn't want to be an admiral. He just wants to be the captain of the Enterprise, and now he does feel as though he's let the best parts of his life go. I get what you're saying with Dr. McCoy, and Dr. McCoy can be a very brash character sometimes, but he also is a very good reader, I think, of the human experience, and I think that in this case he did know exactly what to say to Kirk. It's not quite some of those classic McCoy speeches from the series, like the don't kill the one named Kirk speech from Battles of Terror, which is a favourite of mine, but I get why you say that. So, Rob, let's just have a quick chat about the conception of this movie story, which is when Bennett and Maya and others were sitting around going, okay, what didn't quite work in that first movie? One of the big takeaways they had was there wasn't a villain. Yes, there was a threat, but in the end, the threat was just a slightly misunderstood probe, which is fine for a 50-minute episode, but it didn't really hold together in a movie. It's a nice conceptual idea, but if you're a casual member of the audience, you want a villain. So they literally went through all the 79 episodes of original Trek and said, who's a great villain that we could bring back in the Trek universe? Watched Space Seed from season 1, 1967, saw Khan and said, yeah, this is great, let's bring Khan back. It's perfectly set up to bring him back. Went out, wrote the script, started working on it. After they'd done several drafts of the script, they realised no one had actually asked Ricardo Montalbán if he would like to come back and play Khan. And so they've contacted him. He said, yeah, I would absolutely love to come back, but I'm contracted to Fantasy Island at the moment. And so there's a reason why Khan is only on about 2 sets in the entire movie and actually doesn't interact with most of the main cast, is because he had to do all of his scenes in a very small block separately when he could get away from Fantasy Island for a couple of weeks.
That's fascinating. I never knew that.
Yeah, so look, I think that Khan works really, really well as a villain here. It surprises me that this villain from one episode of the classic series suddenly is the linchpin for this entire movie, but I get it. And it's interesting, I think now there's almost been an inversion of things where I think people see Star Trek 2 and then they go, oh, I want to go find this episode, Space Seed, that has Khan in it and find out about it. It's almost like Space Seed has become the prequel to Star Trek 2 rather than Star Trek 2 being the sequel to Space Seed.
Yeah, it's interesting because although we were watching Star Trek as a family, like the original series, I mentioned that earlier, I've got to say when I watched this the first time, I would have had no memory or no ability to put 2 and 2 together and go, oh yes, this is Khan, who we met in blah 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 episode in the 60s. I was just too young for that. I think this sort of stuff is easier when fans come along at a later time. And there might be a bunch of Star Trek movies and, the original series is all on videotape and there's 24 coffee table books they can read and they can just step into it and make a better fist of it than I could at 7 or 8 years old in the 80s. And I think a good analogy is Doctor Who. Like when I read Peter Haining's A Celebration coffee table book around 87, I could instantly connect the dots on a bunch of stuff. Whereas maybe a young kid watching The Deadly Assassin in 1976 hadn't seen a Master story before. So he's like, oh, who the hell's this Master guy? Why is he all rotten? Oh my God. Whereas I could open that coffee table and go, oh, yes, that's the Master. He'd been in this, he'd been in that. This was his debut story. And I knew things before I'd even seen the episodes in question. Anyway, long story short, when I first saw this, I obviously understood it was an old enemy because they say as much in the show. But I had no further context for Khan. None.
No, I certainly had no idea that he was a previous baddie when I saw this for the first time, and probably for a couple of times afterwards. It wasn't until I started getting properly into Star Trek fandom that I started, and started reading reference books and the like, that I actually learnt all that. So it is an interesting choice because I suspect that scene where Chekov comes across the Botany Bay and he's sort of in the Botany Bay? Botany Bay? There must have been a very small percentage of the audience who actually went, hang on, Botany Bay, that rings a bell. Oh, wow, this is Khan. Must have been a very small percentage of the audience. But I think that there is enough there for you to go, okay, this is a guy that they encountered before. There is that quick backstory that Kirk banished Khan to this planet, and now this planet is desolate and all the rest of it. And it's enough to go, Khan thinks that Kirk's a real dick.
Yeah.
And he's out for a terrible revenge.
Yeah. Should we talk revenge then?
Well, let's talk revenge. Let's talk Khan. What do you think of the whole Khan plot? Khan, the actor, Khan, the character, Ricardo Montalbán, his chest, whatever you want to talk about.
I get that vengeance is a theme, and I get that they want to hammer it home, and I get that it's kind of the point. But in places, it just doesn't ring true for me, Dave. For a guy who's super smart, and at one stage, even one of the crew's like, dude, we've got a ship. We've got the device. We don't have to do any of this bullshit. Let's go, man. Let's go and do our thing and be happy.
You've beaten him. You've escaped his exile. You've crippled him.
Yes, yeah. And Khan, this super smart guy, can't evaluate that that's a better way to go than going on the vengeance path. And it's a cautionary tale, sure, I get it. You shouldn't seek vengeance on people. You can lead yourself down a rabbit hole. I get all of that. But to get there, we have to believe how irrational Khan becomes when he's been set up to be otherwise really, really smart and really, really calculating. It just doesn't quite lock into place for me.
It does lock into place for me, and I think that is purely on the power of Ricardo Montalbán's performance. He does sell to me the idea that this guy is a little bit unhinged now, and his exile, the loss of his wife, the loss of many of his followers, has just driven him to this point where he needs to hurt Kirk. But you're right, it is a borderline thing, and you're right. Look, I'm actually glad they have that scene there, because they do bell the cat there. They do put a lampshade on it. They do have Joachim say to Khan, Lord, you've done it. You've won. Let's go. And I think that does at least acknowledge that there is that point, and look, they need to have the third act of the movie, so Khan has to do it.
Yes,
I get
it,
but
I know.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Let's talk then about the Enterprise and her crew. Kirk, we see, as we both discussed, is moving on. He has to sort of get his mojo back. He has to work out what he wants to do with his life, and I actually like that introspection, because let's face it, James Kirk in the 60s wasn't the most introspective of characters, so I like that they've given it to him. They do give him an ex and a son.
Yeah. And
one of the things that I did take away from this viewing of it was that thread of the plot I didn't think really landed at all. There's a couple of lines about that old Boy Scout used to hang around with James Kirk, and then it's sort of like, yeah, he's actually your dad. And I couldn't quite work out whether David was meant to know that Kirk was his dad or not.
Right.
Obviously, Kirk didn't know, but I didn't think that sort of worked quite as well as they thought it was going to. There perhaps wasn't enough space in between everything else going on to really bring that whole concept of Kirk's got a family now to the fore.
I remember when I was really young not liking David much at all. Partly because it is that, oh yeah, Kirk's got a son now, ring-in thing. And when you're 7 and you're watching, the original series, you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't work for me. He doesn't have a son. And then it's compounded, I think, when he's such a shit to Kirk for a section of the movie. And when you're 7 or 8 years old, someone being a shit to the hero, it's like, oh, well, f*** that guy. Yeah. When I watch it now, it's with more nuance and understanding where he's coming from. And I think it's still a little overplayed and overly dramatic. And he just wants to believe the absolute worst about Kirk, even though Kirk is well known for being, quite upstanding. But it is better for me now, I'll say that much. And on a serious note, of course, I also think about the actor now. Yeah. And I think, oh, wow, okay, you're going to get a couple more bites of the cherry with Star Trek, but before the 80s are over, dude, you're dead. Like, oh, that's so sad. Obviously, I wasn't thinking that watching it when I was a kid because it hadn't happened, but now looking back, it's kind of like watching Remembrance of the Daleks and, Dursley McLinden in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Merritt Butrick died in 1989 at the age of 29, which is just
ridiculous.
Just insane, yeah. That is quite tragic. I partially agree with you. I do think that because they're trying to do a whole father, abandoned son, lost child, reunited thing in a very small portion of a relatively short movie, there isn't quite the space to do it. But what I did pick up watching it this time was they do have those moments of not reconciliation, but of acknowledgement. That moment towards the end when they're on the bridge and it looks like they're not going to make it, and you can see David sort of saying, okay, this Kirk guy's a good guy and he's good at his job, and Kirk's looking at his son and going, this man's a good man and he's good at his job, and there is that sort of just look of mutual respect and understanding that it looks like we're not getting out of this, and that's a shame because I'm maybe just starting to acknowledge that I want to get to know you.
Yeah.
All sort of played with a couple of looks, which is just really a testament to the acting that Merritt and Shatner do. But that is, to me, I think probably a part of the movie that didn't quite land.
Yeah. Talking the characters in general, I think there's a massive difference between how this film does getting the old gang back together, so to speak, and how Star Wars does this sort of thing. And I think we saw it again more recently with that final season of Picard. Although the earlier seasons there had been infected with that modern Hollywood sort of vibe, by the time we got to the final season of Picard, it was like, oh, the gang's all here, they're really good at what they do, they're great mates, they're going to save the day. And that's also what we get here. Like, the old bulls step into the ring again and they take care of business. They don't have some plucky new crew show the old boys what's what and embarrass them and make jokes about them being too old to do stuff. The writers actually give the audience what they want, to see the old heroes step up and do great stirring stuff and be great mates. It's not rocket science telling adventure stories and making people happy. But Star Wars completely flubbed this sort of thing in the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, I think that's very, very fair, very, very correct. Although the ensemble doesn't all get a lot to do in this one, and I mean, Sulu is barely in this movie, Uhura is barely in this movie, that's a shame. Even McCoy, I mean, doesn't get a lot to do, but what the big three get to do is be the characters everybody wants them to be. Yep. So Kirk gets to be the space commander who's in charge and eventually outwits his opponent and beats him in battle. Spock gets to be the logical, upstanding supporter of Kirk and the one who can add that level of rationality to Kirk's thinking. And McCoy gets to be the human guy. He gets to be the one that's giving Kirk life advice. He gets to be the one that's sort of bringing all that perspective into it together. So yes, you do get to see these characters be the characters you want them to be, and that does scratch an itch, even though I think a lot of them aren't really in it. Scotty gets a little bit to do. He gets a couple of scenes and his nephew gets killed, which is sad. Chekov actually gets more to do than he gets probably in the entire original series, which is good for him.
True. Yeah.
It's good to see Walter Koenig doing that before he became Bester.
Yeah, exactly. But I just love they're there and they're good at what they do. They're not being undermined. It's great.
Yes, we should mention, though, Kirstie Alley makes her first appearance as Savick, which is a really good performance. I liked that character coming in, and I liked the way that having the young up-and-coming officer does highlight the differences in style between the older bulls, as you say.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But she's not overwritten to be awesome at everything and upstaging the old cast, because back in the 80s, I think writers understood, well, you don't do that because that will piss the audience off, whereas I think a modern writer goes, how can I piss the audience off? And would do the complete opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good one. I do want to mention Paul Winfield, who was there as the commander of the Reliant, and I spent the whole movie going, I know that face from somewhere. And usually I'm very good at picking what actors have been in, and this one I just couldn't pick it. Do you know where it was, Rob?
No idea, no.
General Franklin from Babylon 5.
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
Oh, I'd have to go back and have a look at his face, but yeah, the vibe, yeah, okay, I get it.
Yeah. So that was what that was playing at me. So that's
Marcus's dad. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's right. Yeah. So that was a cool little link. We'll come back to Spock because I think we've got a bigger Spock conversation to have.
Sure.
Let's talk about the look and the feel of the movie. What did you make of the visuals for 1982? Remembering that we just talked about the Never-Ending Story in quite glowing terms about its visuals in our last Alternate Galaxies, which is a roughly contemporary of this.
I was a little disappointed, honestly, with how bad the effects are in places. In some places, though, I'll say they're very good. As good as 1982 has any right to be, maybe even better. But there are other scenes in this where I thought, oh man, they could have done that effect in the 60s TV series. basically, it had been long enough for me not to have forgotten the film per se, but forgotten the gloss or the lack of gloss that sort of sat over it. And in places I felt, eesh, this really shows its age more than I thought it would, particularly when I think back to the first film. And again, I haven't seen the first film for quite some time, but I think of the first film as being big and glossy and actually quite good looking. You mentioned at the start the budget for that was much bigger, though, so that might have something to do with it.
Yeah, I think it absolutely has to have something to do with it. I more or less agree with what you just said. There are some shots that are very, very well done, but it is very clear that they don't have the money that they really need to make a Star Trek film. And as much as the production team has said, okay, we've only got $12 million, let's make this a character piece. Let's make this about messages. We're going to make it about revenge. We're going to make it about aging. We're going to make it a real piece between Kirk and Khan. At the end of the day, it's a Star Trek movie, and you're going to have space stuff happen, and that does cost money. So whilst I think the Enterprise model still looks great, because they've got it over from the first movie, and incidentally, that refitted Constitution class Enterprise for the movies is my favourite Enterprise. I really like the way it looks. There are moments that do look very cheap. The Nebula looks ridiculously cheap. Some of the effects with the Genesis device look cheap. Side note, the computer graphic that tells the how Genesis works, you know, that one that they watch?
Yes.
That was done by a division that went on to become Pixar.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
Very, very early example of their computer graphic work.
Well, that wasn't actually a bad moment. That's not too bad.
No, that's not too bad, but it is super early 80s.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, look, I think it does look cheaper than certainly the first one. Frankly, it looks cheaper than all of the Star Trek movies. They obviously get better from here as this one brought in some money, so they go, we can have a bit more money next time. I will say though, I think that it is very well shot, and I think that they shoot the two space battles between the Enterprise and the Reliant very well, and somebody's actually put some thought into how it's going to look and how it's going to work. And it is not like a surface naval battle where everything's happening in two dimensions. They have actually gone, no, it's more like a submarine battle where you've got three dimensions to play with, and that actually does come to the fore. And there's a great shot where you see the Enterprise passing above the Reliant in the opposite direction, where you go, yes, they've actually thought about how to shoot this and make it work. So I think they've done a pretty good job, given they have, $40 million to make a sci-fi movie today would be insane.
Yeah. That second engagement is very submarine style, as you say, where one ship passes over the other. The first one, I think, is more traditional sort of naval warfare. Like they just take big shots at each other and really belt the shit out of one another, frankly. But that second engagement, I think the cleverest thing there isn't so much that it's tense, although it is very tense, but that it plays to the strength of the effects. Because we're talking about how the effects are a bit cheap here and there. You know, Star Wars was on this from a great height, effects-wise. A New Hope was doing things better, faster, 5 years earlier.
Oh, put this next to Empire, which only came out 2 years before, and Empire, yeah, absolutely.
So having the ships circling and doing their own thing and passing over one another, it actually works really nicely because they're not trying to make them zoom around crazily. I know they're sort of capital ships, so they wouldn't zoom around, but they're not moving very quick. I really like it. And throw in the tension, because it is tense. I think that's a really neat scene, especially that second engagement. Yeah,
and I think it does all turn on the temperament and the experience of the two captains. And so that sense that it is a personal battle between Kirk and Khan does come through the spaceships. Whereas, look, you're right, the first one is just let's lob some missiles at each other and see who wins. So I do like that. Something else that I think works really effectively and again is a bit serendipitous is the score. This is, in my view, one of the three best scores from a Star Trek movie, and it stands up really, really well. But it was done by a chap called James Horner, who was 28 at the time he did this.
Wow.
And the reason he gets the job is because Nicholas Meyer was looking at his budget and going, I can't afford a big-name, established composer for my movie. I'll get this 28-year-old guy who I think's got a bit of, knows what he's doing. Let's see how he goes. And he comes out with, I think, a really, really strong score.
That can sometimes be the case, though. Think of, like, Babylon 5, for example. You sometimes hire these lower tier guys, and they're not lower tier in quality, just in recognition and how much they can charge and stuff. Sometimes you hit gold. It is a good soundtrack. Totally agree.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a highlight for me.
Now, Dave, there are very memorable lines from this film. You talk about music being memorable. I think a line like "Khan" is something that even maybe people who haven't even seen the film might know from how many times it's been
yes,
parodied and such in pop culture. I mean, it's very operatic, isn't it? And it is easy to parody. But sometimes I think a lot of good art is easy to parody, whether it's the way someone says a line or it's a song lyric or whatever. The more you can parody something, I've noticed, sometimes the more interesting it is and the more good it is. And that's why you can make a parody of it, because there's something to latch onto.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it is a choice to go big in those moments, because there are other moments where Meyer gets Shatner to go a lot smaller. The way he did that, though, was Shatner would start big and Meyer would just do 20 takes, like literally do 20 takes. And by the end of it, Shatner's a bit bored, so he's actually giving a much more sedate performance. So the fact that he picked which ones to do that for, I think, is really, really important. What other lines did you have there, Rob?
The other big one, I think, Dave, is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And I think that sums up the show's humanism. I think it's a very Star Trek-y thing to say that sometimes sacrifice is necessary to protect others. Is Star Trek-y a term? I just made that up. And of course it frames Spock's death as a heroic act, embodying the ideals of Star Trek. It's the most Star Trek-y death you could have on Star Trek. And it's a great way for him to go out.
Yeah. Although, as we've said, there are moments when the themes of this movie are slammed home, I do think that this is a very mature movie, and particularly for sci-fi and for 80s sci-fi, this is a very mature movie where the themes are very genuine, the humanism, as you say, is very genuine, but the stuff that they set up at the start of the movie about aging, about how you face death, and about the needs of the many does play out through the whole movie and does reach a climax here where Spock does have to make that decision that, well, I'm not making it out regardless of what happens, but if my sacrifice can save the crew, well, so be it. That's the logical thing to do, but it's also the human thing to do.
Yeah.
I still watch this movie now, and when that whole sequence starts to play out, I'm utterly absorbed. And then from the moment when Kirk turns around and sees that Spock's chair's empty and realises what Spock's gone to do, through down to the final moment. I love just the little stuff like Leonard Nimoy standing up and straightening his jacket before he speaks to Kirk.
That's nice.
I love that exchange. I have been and always will be your friend. It's just really, really good. It's a lovely, well done scene without over dramatic music or a lot of wailing. Shatner is clearly distraught, but not over the top. So, and then it goes into that funeral scene with Scotty playing Amazing Grace, Kirk giving his speech and just holding it together, and then the wonderful shot as the orchestra swells up, just not too much but just enough, and the sun rises above the Genesis planet. It's just a really beautiful set of scenes that I think really lands this movie.
Yeah, I was more upset with the funeral scene than the scenes before where Spock actually dies. It was the funeral that actually got to me more. Sigmund Freud, analysed that. I don't know why, but it just was.
Yep. No, I can totally understand that. It's a very, very well done scene, and I'm glad that, again, a not particularly long movie does take the time to really make that all worthwhile. I do need to make the comment, though, Rob, you said that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one being very Star Trek-y. I agree. But what is equally Star Trek-y is that they do come back in the next movie, and the very end of that, after they've brought Spock back, and he says, why do you risk your entire ship, your crew, why do you do this? And Kirk says, because the needs of the one outweighs the needs of the many.
Yeah, nice.
And so that inversion of it is also, I think, equally and wonderfully Star Trek. And that's why I do think that this is a good movie to talk about, because I think it does set up what's going to happen for the rest of this franchise in a way that, frankly, the first movie doesn't. As worthy as it is, and I know the first movie's got fans, and we've knocked it a bit in this conversation, I get that. But this is the one that I think, in terms of thematics, in terms of visuals, and in terms of character arcs, does set up what the next bunch of movies do. It absolutely sets up Search for Spock, which then sets up The Voyage Home, which then sets up Final Frontier, etc., all of which leads into Generations, and Generations leads into... And I could go on. I think this is sort of... I don't think we get the last 40 years of Star Trek without this movie working as well as it does.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the setup for future films, or at least the next film. I know we come at this from hindsight, but I think they really do undercut Spock's death a lot by saying, well, he's dead, but we've got this machine that brings life, and we're going to launch him into the middle of it, ... And I actually didn't know what contemporary reviews were saying about this, so I sent ChatGPT on a mission, Dave, and I found that broadly, some people were like, yeah, nah, he's not dead. Others were like, yeah, if they make another film, they'll bring him back. People were saying that at the time. But some people were taken in by it, even with all the clues they put up there on the screen that I've just mentioned. So I think it's easy to see the clues with hindsight and think, oh, it's super duper obvious they were going to bring him back. But back in 82, based on my research, such as it is, it was a bit of a coin toss for people on, is he dead? Is he really dead? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so the original cut of the film was a lot more definitive that he was dead, and that tested very badly with test audiences. They're like, we just had this great adventure and Kirk's beat the bad guy and, you've just killed Spock. He's my favourite character. I love Spock. And you walk out of the movie depressed and sad and angry. So
Sure.
that's why they did put in just enough of a set of clues there that should Leonard Nimoy agree to come back, and that was not a fait accompli at this point, they've gone, well, let's just give the audience a little bit of hope that those who want to see it can go, okay, no, but maybe he can come back. And in fact, famously, Leonard Nimoy didn't know that that's how the movie was going to end until he went to the premiere and he's sitting there watching it, and then he sees, his coffin on the Genesis planet, and he thought, I'm getting a phone call, aren't I?
Nice.
So yeah, look, I do think it's a fantastic ending.
Yeah.
Rob, we'll start wrapping this up. Let's do a couple of quick questions. What was your least favourite thing about this rewatch?
I've covered it, I think, and it's how disappointed I was with how bad, in quotation marks, the effects were in some places. I was hoping it would look a bit better. Even as an 80s film, I thought it might have looked better when I went back to it.
Yeah, that's very fair. I've already mentioned mine as well, and that is I was actually quite shocked and disappointed at how poorly the Carol Marcus, David Marcus plot arc characters sort of worked. Yes, it kind of comes together okay, although Carol Marcus does sort of just disappear from the movie. I remember them being a bigger part of this and more important, and that just had landed. So that was disappointing for me. I'll keep going with, look, my favourite thing in the rewatch. It's a toss-up here between just how well those themes I thought did work across the movie, and also the performance of William Shatner as Kirk. I know that William Shatner is an actor that is very easy to parody, and he's sort of got his reputation as being a very over-the-top actor. And in fact, Strange New Worlds had quite a bit of fun at Shatner's expense in a recent episode. I, however, look at this and go, you know what, that's actually quite unfair. Yes, he's got his own particular style, but I watch William Shatner in this and go, this guy is a really, really good actor and delivers exactly what he needs really, really well. And the fact that he's paired with Ricardo Montalbán, who is also just doing a fantastic job, I think just works really, really well.
Excellent. My favourite thing in the rewatch, there's really two things. One was rediscovering moments. Like I mentioned, those creatures being harvested for the larvae.
Yes.
And I was thinking, oh yeah, I remember that now. That used to freak me out when I was a kid. When things have laid dormant in your mind and then a scene starts happening and something trips in your brain. Oh, wait a minute, I know this. And it all comes back. That's such a really nice feeling. And I don't know if I'm alone in thinking that or whether it delights other people too, but it delights me. And I also really like the scene where Kirk and pals get to the base and Khan's crew have killed and literally strung up all the staff. It's quite horrific, And it doesn't feel quite Star Trek. It's like, oh, Jesus, is this a prototype for, Event Horizon or something like that? It feels very mature and tough and takes us away from the sort of cartoon villain you'd get on TV Star Trek. And it makes it more real. Khan might look and speak a bit ridiculously, but you see this and you think, okay, wow, he's not to be messed with. Look what he's done to all these corpses,
Yeah, I think this is a very good example of the attitude they took, which is, you know what, we're making a movie. I know this is based on a television show, but movies are different to TV, and yes, you do need scenes like that. So I think that's a really good example. Overall, Rob, look, I think I've said everything I want to say. This is one of my favourite Star Trek movies, but I think it holds together as a movie generally. I've really enjoyed going back and watching it, and if you haven't watched it for a long time, or indeed if you haven't seen it at all, pull it out sometime. I think it does hold up.
Yeah, I am glad I rewatched it without doubt. It had been a long time for me. Do I see myself watching it again, though, in the next decade? Unless a friend comes over and says, oh, hey, I've never seen that. Or for some ungodly reason, another podcast pings me and wants me to talk about Star Trek rather than you, Dave, There might be reasons to rewatch it sooner, but in all likelihood, I won't be rushing back to this anytime soon. There's just so much content out there in the world that I've yet to experience. Watching 80s Star Trek again is pretty low down on my list of things. But this is an 8 out of 10 for me, which is certainly good. It's not God tier, but I can see that it's good. I enjoyed it, and I was happy to rewatch it.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed that, because we're going to do 2 more. So next month we'll be back with our second Star Trek movie, and I've selected Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, because I wanted to do something from the back half of the classic movies. And look, I think that in their own ways, The Voyage Home and The Final Frontier have been spoken about a lot, whereas I don't think there has been as much conversation about Star Trek 6. Plus, it's also my favourite Star Trek movie, so I'm looking forward to watching it again. But after that, in October, we'll do our final one, which we're going to do a next-gen film. And we thought, look, you know what? There are things I could easily say about all 4 of the next-gen movies. So rather than me picking this one, let's have the audience pick it. So maybe in a week or so's time, so that I've got enough time to download it and take it to Africa and watch it while I'm away, we will do a poll. So audience, you can pick which of the next generation films you want to be our 3rd Star Trek movie. The one not necessarily you think is best, but will make for the most interesting conversation.
Nice. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, this is a 5-Sunday month, Rob, and we have got something coming out every Sunday of this month. We've already had the list makers. We've had our Gin and TARDIS on the Mark of the Rani. Obviously this. The 5th Sunday of August will be our usual monthly show where we're going deep into Trial of a Time Lord. But on the 4th weekend, Rob, between this and that, you've got a little surprise coming.
I do have a little surprise, and I'm not going to tell anyone what it is.
No, so I know what it is, and I'm looking forward to hearing it. So that'll be a lot of fun. It's a jam-packed month from the Doctor Who show. But until then, I've been Dave.
I've been Rob.
And we'll speak again many times very soon.
We will. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to Alternate Galaxies, the podcast where Rob and Dave from the Doctor Who show take a look at other great sci-fi and fantasy that we think Doctor Who fans might like. You can reach us at hello@thedwshow.net, on Twitter @thedwshow, or on Facebook /thedwshow. Alternate Galaxies is an irregular podcast, so stay tuned to the Doctor Who show and other programs on our feed to know when the next episode's coming. Our theme music is called Wretched Destroyer and is by Kevin MacLeod. Find him at incompetech.com. Well, that's it for this episode. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye!